So hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan, and I'm here representing Collider, who is a proud partner of Detroit Tech Watch. So Collider brings together technology professionals and digital business leaders to collaborate and explore innovative solutions. So hopefully this sounds like you and I can help you get involved. So just reach out to our team at collider.altimetric.com. I'm excited to be with Honorio and Mike and the awesome Daniel Davis. So Honorio or Mike, kick it off, take it away.
Yeah, I can go. I can go ahead and jump in because I'm the one who got kind of excited about this topic. So, funny thing, I deal with DevOps a lot in my daily life, and so I consult as well as my day job. And I'll tell you, a lot of people know the term DevOps. They know some general things about DevOps. There are just a ton of people that are struggling with DevOps, right, and getting it right, and actually having it be a true value add to the company. So, Daniel, thanks for joining us. From the title of the talk, it sounds like kind of more of maybe a beginner thing, but you know what? That's okay. I think in this department we can all use, right, like things that might key us into to insights that we didn't have before about a subject that you hear about all the time. So, Daniel, thank you very much for joining us, and take it off, my buddy.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much. Thanks for the warm welcome, everyone. Yeah, I think you're spot on, Mike. It is kind of an intro talk, but depending on the crowd, I am all for rolling with wherever we go. So, what the heck is DevOps, right? So, let's talk through that. Real quick agenda as we're having the conversation. I'll give a brief intro of me, where I'm coming from, what it makes or what makes me feel like I'm anyone appropriately skilled or experienced enough to even talk to this. So I think I can set the stage for that. We'll quickly cover that focus as I kind of hinted to already. So that's easy. We'll start with the question, then we'll get into the content, all things DevOps. So who am I? Where am I coming from? So Daniel Davis, I got the Twitter tag down in there, if that makes sense. I got some contact details at the end, happy to share. But currently founder lead consultant with an organization called Elevate that I've been building out and working on the last few years. Little prop here, hiring. If folks are interested in joining and helping me build out a cool organization, we can certainly connect after. Where I'm coming from in that regard is this business improvement consultant, right? Trying to take all things, technology up a level, if that makes sense. And that's where the cuteness of Elevate plays in. But coming from mostly a developer and technical background. So a lot of that development and tech coaching is what I do still. But love to play around, always been an innovator, life hacker, a maker. In fact, right next to me over there behind the curtain is a really big resin 3D printer that I bought, and I'm looking forward to exploring how to make things real, like take some 3D models and make them real in a literal sense. I do enjoy the outdoors. I've been in and around that for a long time, doing things outside, of course. Along the way, got into snowboarding and eventually figured out, all right, well, I can't do the fun, crazy stuff that the young kids are doing anymore, but I can certainly help the younger kids learn and grow into doing those things. So I do, in fact, spend a little bit of time in the terrain parks teaching kids new tricks, but just can't do the tricks myself anymore. Too old and don't bounce like I used to. But then obviously also got a family around all of that. Parent of the 3 kids there. That's a relatively recent picture. Jordan's a senior in high school, and Isaac and Tyler, the twin boys there, are sophomores. So I got a fun, busy household. In fact, that's what I was doing as we were kicking off, texting upstairs to the whole family. Hey, keep it down up there. I'm running a session. So we'll see where that goes. If you hear loud stuff, it's just the family upstairs. And then these are our 2 pups we got in the family, Cedar, the chocolate lab, and Hemlock, the black lab. So that's the family and whatnot. So that's where I'm coming from again. As we're having this conversation again, as I hinted to, let's make this a discussion, please. Feel free to holler out and hive mind learning here. And then, as I mentioned these things, always kind of think through it, and as they're coming as principles over any kind of prescription, especially in this talk where we're talking high level and theoretical type stuff. I have a slide that hints to some tools. In fact, I'm going to use the audience here to help me improve that, because I realized as I was updating this deck from a few years back, pre-COVID times, I'm sure a lot has changed, and I didn't get a good chance to go through and figure out what are the new tools supporting DevOps. So maybe we can even explore that together. Cool, cool. It's all about a framework, I think, for thinking that I'm going to, guide us through here today, more so than anything else. So cool. All right. So let me start with this question. Is DevOps a role you would fill on a team? Any thoughts to that?
I think it might be a role, yes, or at least it's something that some of the developers have to do, think about, spend some time on. What does anybody else think?
I'll throw in here really quick. So that's kind of, what I thought probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm by no means like an expert at DevOps, so don't take it that I am. But what we had a real large changeover probably about 3 years ago at the company that I worked for, and I started to realize we had a new CTO come in, and what I realized is DevOps is it's probably not the right word, but like it's more of a mindset, a mentality, a method, a set of processes, procedures. Really, it's a company-wide thing, right? I used to think, okay, well, it's the tech department that essentially is DevOps, and there might be DevOps roles within there. But really, for us, when we transitioned, and it was a process, we transitioned really the whole company into that mindset. So even folks that weren't working on code, right, still had the same type of processes as we had in the software development department. So that's just my take on it.
Awesome. Other thoughts?
I'm kind of with you on that one, Michael. It's like when you're doing mob programming, you have driver and navigator, but then anyone that's not the current driver or the navigator is less of a role per se than a mindset, like being the researcher, because you're observing and paying attention to the fact that there's a need that's coming up, or being the sponsor role where you see someone who's got low esteem and your job that you decide to take on is in response to what you observe. So very similar.
Very cool. Thanks, Bob.
I was going to say one thing.
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to talk over anybody. I was going to say one thing is I think DevOps involves a certain amount of automation. And I've heard of places having like a tools team that specifically, hey, we're going to do the ancillary stuff, like the build, the deployment, stuff like this. We're going to take care of that tooling wise and give the developers the tools they need to get, their code deployed, which sounds kind of like what we're talking about with DevOps also. So.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yep.
What happens when they're busy and you have to wait in the queue to get your CI/CD set up? Because they're the only ones that know how to do it.
Don't go stealing my thunder too fast there, Bob. No, it's beautiful. Exactly. Those are the types of thoughts I want us to keep mindful of as we're chatting for the next hour or so, right? Thinking about like, okay, is it a role? Maybe. Is it a mindset? Maybe. Is it tools? Maybe. Right? All of those things I want us to just kind of keep open to as we're talking through it. So awesome. Any other quick thoughts? I don't want to rush us. I think we got plenty of time here. If I just read through the slides, we'll be done in 15 minutes. You guys can go back to Netflix or whatever else keeps you busy at night. But I'm hoping to draw us out a little too. So no worries. Any other thoughts? All right. Cool. Let's keep rolling. I get my focus back. I adjusted my view of all of you that are sharing your lovely videos so I could see some interaction, and I lost my screen. Let me see if that gets it. Oh, there we go. All right. So it's interesting. DevOps is what's considered a portmanteau, if my pronunciation of it is correct, of the words development and operations. So the fun fact behind that, Portman II is in actuality, as a definition, is a combination of two or more words and their definitions into one new word and a collection of those definitions, right? So this DevOps Portman II is, obviously tying those words together, taking a chunk of development, the chunk from operations, ops, concatenating them together, right? We could build a little method for that if we wanted, and we get, DevOps. So it's okay, cool. Well, like DevOps in theory is the idea of it in some context is a level of development efforts and a level of operation efforts or infrastructure efforts, right? And how those two things come together. Now, obviously, both being very dynamic, broad scoped things themselves, when you bring those together, it gets even more hairy, right? Like there is any number of ways that we could all look at development and it means different things to us. We could look at operations and it probably means different things to us. By pulling all of that together, we've now got doubly confusing complexity inherently within it, right? So it's just like, understanding, okay, DevOps could mean probably lots and lots of things and is certainly open to interpretation. So I'm going to bounce over now to kind of running through where does it come from originally, right? Its origins. Then we'll kind of talk to how it's evolved and where it's going, and use some of this to guide us. So, but real quick, any thoughts to the idea of, that simple context of it being a Portman II?
I like that, Mike.
Go ahead.
I like that Mike pointed out that it was just a lot of words too. I mean, a lot of syllables too. So DevOps just rolls off the tongue nice, versus development operations. So good point.
Yep. Yeah, that's true.
It occurs to me too that DevOps as a nice, convenient, shortened thing sort of reinforces the idea that they're distinct things. There's developing the solution, and then there's actually running the solution and keeping it from catching on fire, right?
Yep.
And there's so much more.
Oh, yes, for sure. Awesome. So as we, think again about its origins, right? It kind of started out as a solely development focused method, right? In which, we pushed for the communication, collaboration, and interaction between teams, right? Software teams and infrastructure teams, right? Hence the software developers and infrastructure operations professionals or operators, right? To kind of bring those two worlds together, right? And I think it still can represent that quite well. It's the idea of, right, an organization may embrace DevOps in the idea of collaboration between the development team and the operations team, right? They don't have to be one and the same individual, but they could be, right? But originally, its goal was to simplify and break down some of those barriers, those walls, those bottlenecks, like you hinted to, Bob, right? The idea of, well, what happens when Jimmy, my ops guy, is out to lunch and I really needed to deploy this thing like hot fix right now, right? You've got a barrier at something holding you back in a sense, right? So we kind of like bring these things together to be more collaborative, more supportive of the two different needs, right? The need to build and the need to release in a sense. And that's where, again, it started to, basically come from, and how it's evolved since then. I think we'll kind of, talk through now. I would at some point, I probably should add in here, like, who was the first one to kind of term it, right? To kind of key in on it and quote unquote put the copyright on the DevOps term. I'm sure it's stemmed out there from somewhere and somebody's got a record, but I think ideally, again, this is where it originated from. So any thoughts or questions around that? Again, just simply treating it as like two different teams working together better.
I could see it coming from maybe like load balancers to start with. A lot of companies doing websites, and usually the developers build the website, but they're not like the ones who are going to say, oh, we've got a ton of load coming at this. We got to do something. We got to put a load balancer in front of her or something. Usually that's going to be operations, right? Or, gosh, we've got to spin up a bunch more databases. That's going to be the DBAs, right? So I could see where those kind of things would make a lot of sense to say, coordinate. Okay, guys, we need you to bring up more databases because we've got so much load going, and or we need you to put up a load balancer because we just can't handle all this traffic on this one website, stuff like that.
Yep, you're spot on, Mario. I think that ties it together great, and it's the idea of like, right, we're working together to plot and plan our futures and our alignments as we need to and can in order to help one another, as opposed to simple gatekeeping in a sense. And I'll hint to that gatekeeping and whatnot in a moment, hopefully in a funny way, but you guys will let me know for sure or not. Okay. All right.
I have
so
one more. Oh, go ahead.
Please. No,
Yeah,
you're good.
no, I have one more quick thing that I think would be appropriate here. So, that's really interesting because I think you're absolutely spot on, right? Like it could be essentially a tighter bridge between multiple departments. How we're implementing it where I'm working now is essentially we're all on the same team, but there are people that have the ops position and people have the software engineer position, and and we're kind of doing it in more of like everybody considers the aspects, right? Like we're not just like hey, we're using agile because we use sprints. One of the big things that was of note that I thought about that I wouldn't necessarily do as a developer innately is think about security, right? Like that sounds horrible, right? But essentially you're trying to get a product out the door, you're thinking of features, you're thinking all these different things, but what you're not usually thinking of is security. One of the big things, so I started the job where I'm at, I started last April, and it was kind of like a little bit of a mindset shift. Yes, I had transitioned to DevOps in the previous company, but it's even tighter here. Like it's even more implemented where I'm at. And it was like, oh, so you don't really want, it's something like you don't, security scans and pen testing and whatnot, you don't really want it to get to that point because you want to think about it early on, right? In the planning, in the developing, in the the build stage and all these things. If you're thinking about it in those early stages, then what you don't have is a blockage in your queue in those later stages, right? So that was just something that I mentioned. Security was one of those things where it was like, I'm not somebody who loves security, but I want things to be secure, right? And so part of my job as a developer where I'm at is to really think about security really early on, right? And we're thinking about it all the way through. So
Yep. I think that's great, Mike. That ties it together. We'll hit that actually from both directions in the coming slides. So good segue for sure. I guess I owe you lunch at some point now because you're helping feed along the slides. So
no, we owe you lunch for coming and talking, Daniel. Thanks.
No, all good. All right. So we'll pivot a little here for a minute and kind of talk. Okay, well, like what was the focus and the why then? Like what did that bring to us, right? So DevOps tended to target in these following areas, right? The product and service delivery, right? We've got a need to release, and the better collaborative and aligned we are, right? Then we should be able to release and let our products and services out to the wild in a more efficient manner. It's certainly, brought in the context and an area I think you're into like automation and some of the right things that start to play around there, right? So, quality testing, validation efforts and aligning to those things, right? And the sooner we tackle those, even what you're hinting to, even maybe from that security angle, Mike, the sooner the better, right? All that kind of right good stuff. Also brings in, and if we kind of thought like, okay, a dev team's building and they're validating quality, but they need to get it out the door and then need to keep an eye on it, right? That's where like things like monitoring, metrics, system health all start to play in, and like that can play into the areas of DevOps. And then, of course, that true, build context, whether it's build, deploy, knowing and understanding the differences between planning release-wise and deployment, out into the wild, wise in a sense, and getting clarity between those two things. Just because you have a release doesn't necessarily mean it's a deploy, and vice versa, right? So overlaying all that, and then building into the idea of like, well, maintaining and keeping, things, appropriately, continuously getting updated, or, when and where you need to, and align to those things, right? So all really is last sentence hints to, in an effort to improve that reliability, that security, all of those right things, while hopefully also making it faster, right? And allowing us to take advantage of those tools in things that we know can get us out there sooner, right? So increasing and faster development and deployment cycles in a sense. Awesome. Thoughts to this?
Daniel, for what it's worth, perhaps something missing here? Feedback.
Yes.
So for instance,
I love it.
if let's say as a very common example, there's a batch job that runs at night that massages everything to be just right for the day, and it takes longer and longer and longer. And so actually getting that information back to the team is not a one-way thing.
Yep. No, it's awesome. I like it. Any other thoughts? Cool.
You know, the thought
Okay.
crossed my mind that
Please, Narnia.
I was going to say, I think this probably had to start at Google, because Google has done so many things over the years that, you know, now the rest of us say, oh yeah, we got to do that. And I'm sure probably they had a team there because they had all these cheap little servers that they were, you know, deploying. And when one would go down, they'd have somebody run in, switch it out real quick, and then, you know, bring it back up again. And so I'm sure this whole idea of DevOps is probably at least partially theirs, you know. Them, you know, oh yeah,
I believe.
have somebody. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Nope. I think you're right. There's kind of a few that we tend to circle back to now, right? And it's like, did it come from Apple, Google, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, right? Like all of the main leaders and drivers in that. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. One, they're usually the folks that have the money to, you know, spend time on innovation, which is awesome, and we need it. But yeah, all in an effort to improve their cycles, right? It's kind of a force feeder, right? Those with money can spend the money to figure out ways to make more money, and therefore it's all good, right? Like, so there's some science behind that I wish I was better at. Yeah. I'm gonna be true. You be honest, right? So for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. Dan,
cool. Yeah.
Is there one bullet point on here that you think is more impactful than the others by chance? The Scotch has me thinking.
Oh no, I love it when that does that to you, sir. It gets me thinking as well, which is good when I haven't had the Scotch to support it. I don't know. I want to ask that to the group because as much as I keep wanting to say one, I'm like, oh no, it's the no, it's the, so my head is turning there. I'm curious if folks have thoughts too.
I would say the monitoring metrics, system health is a big one, because everybody these days, you know, is expected. A website is like a utility; it'll never be off. You know, if your website goes down, that could be a major business problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. That is really kind of a hard question in my mind too, because right now with some of the consulting I'm doing, we're definitely seeing the benefits of having monitoring, metrics, system health stuff in place, and we're actually expanding the system to make sure that pretty much every service has, you know, system health as we transition to AWS, because they need it, right? And so I've seen a lot of benefit there. The other huge one in my mind is a faster cadence of the proper software being released, right? Like, I don't want to just say more features, because more features isn't always the answer, right? But a good cadence of being able to release software, I think, is extremely important to most businesses, and that's the other big one that I've seen. Quality is part of that as well.
So, Mike, what is the beneficial outcome that you get from having an increased cadence or a regular cadence, depending on where the emphasis is?
So I think that it depends. It definitely depends, right? You're going to ebb and flow as far as that goes. But again, this is totally, my personal recent experience. One thing that I can bring up is we've got a customer, or I've got a customer that essentially has some really large opportunities that they need to be able to flex and release at least small features at a pretty quick cadence. And so if they weren't able to do that, if essentially, they said, hey, it's really just going to kind of be 6 months and it's an all or nothing thing. Or if they said, we really just can't do all these features. We got to do a subset of these features, right? And obviously there's a little bit of compromise, right, on all sides. But I could tell you right now, like the meetings that I've been in with the customer or their potential integrator, there isn't much play, right? Like they absolutely kind of have to release these things. And if we didn't have the systems in place to be able to release at a pretty quick cadence, I mean, we're talking like infrastructure as code, Terraform, AWS, and everything, so they can release pretty quickly. I think that they would be dead in the water with that particular opportunity. So that's just, sorry, hopefully I didn't talk too long on that, but that's my thought. I think in a regular business for, let's say, Bob, an internal system, sometimes it's beneficial. Like I said, it really, the need for these things ebbs and flows. And half the time, if you just wait long enough, there's really not a need for the thing anymore. That sounds horrible, but it is what it is, right? But I think there are distinct opportunities where a company's got to be able to quickly produce. And I think if you don't have the framework and foundation to be able to quickly produce, you will get left behind, right?
I was going to say, in a sense, this is the flip side of agility, right? Agility is I have 2-week sprints, and at the end of every 2 weeks, I want to produce something of value to the business, right? So I produce something of value to the business, but if I can't deploy it because my deployment cadence is like, oh, I'm only going to deploy once every 3 months. Well, how much value is there then?
Yeah.
Right?
Or if it's stuck in some sort of like QA where there's a bottleneck. I will tell you, like we're doing pretty good with DevOps stuff where I work at my day job, but QA is a bottleneck, right? We have QA people that leave, and there's only so much automation going on. If we did have a better system for automation, it would allow us to continue deploying. And these are the software that I work on, the software pieces that I work on are all customer facing pieces. And there's I don't want to say demands, right? But I mean, it really, at the end of the day, it is a demand, right, for certain things. And if QA is holding that up, we obviously do not skip QA really for any reason. But essentially, having unblocking that queue and allowing things to just flow in an automated fashion, or mostly automated fashion, I think is helpful.
No, it's very cool thoughts. I'm gonna and pardon this brief little jaunt down and I've been spending a lot of time in the data world, so this makes sense, I guess. We have about 15 or so folks online. 1/3 of them
it looks like 15, yeah.
1/3. So 5 of them are some variation of a Mike or Michael, right? Like statistically, like how does that happen? Like that's jogging like my brain a little bit. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I wanted to reference Mr. Talby's original question, right? That I think how I would force rank these would be, which did I care more about from a dev or an ops focus? Because if I'm taking the dev perspective, chicken and egg, of course, here, right? I need a valuable product before I care about quality. Then I need quality before I care about, and in fact, now I think about it, I would probably swap monitoring and deployments, 1, 2, 3, 4, if I had these numbered. Then I need, quality before I can deploy, and then I need monitoring to know and understand where system health is, right? So like that's a dev focus, and there's that force ranking of priority in essence. And then inversely, if I would flip that and say, oh, my ops focus, it's the other direction, right? It's 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's caring about monitoring, then deploy, then quality, then the valuable product, right? Because each have their need. Now, I would suppose magic in the middle, right, is okay. Where's the balance that we all, focus in that center place and work our way out as and how we need to, right? So kind of working through that. So I think it's kind of neat to just kind of tie all that together, and love that we were able to collaboratively kind of, pull that together. And hopefully, Mike, I think that's where your Scotch was leading you. So well done. So awesome.
Yeah,
Mike,
that was a great question. I'm glad you asked it.
So Mike, you actually said something that rang a bell for me. You talked about Terraform and from the operations and automation. And one of the things that tends to get used for, because earlier we were also talking about where did all this stuff begin, all the big companies that started developing and refining these processes, like the Netflixes and the Googles and all that stuff.
Yeah.
You can bet your bottom dollar that their focus on mean time to recovery is automated to the bejesus, right?
Yeah.
And they actually, Netflix is really famous for having started the Simian army to actually test that. Well, let's just randomly turn off
Chaos Monkey or whatever, right? Yeah. It's great. Yep.
Whole field of chaos engineering, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, well, let me keep us moving along, and there's definitely time for our deep diatribes towards the end in our discussion Q&A. But let me just assist us in here for the moment. So, like, a focus on, like, well, why? Like, why would we care to focus on this stuff? What's the benefits? So there's other methodologies. We hinted to it, agility, lean, those types of things, right? Where we care less about the prescriptive tools, practices, and more about collaboration and working in, healthier ways, right? To this point, we're still all humans, even behind most of those machines and most of that computer language. We're getting closer to that, where that's becoming less machine driven and starting to scare me a little bit, but ideally, right, there's still the need for us to work in that, right direction. So it's really more about collaboration between what we need to care about development wise and what we need to care about operations wise, whether those are teams or responsibilities or, again, tools and techniques. There's the idea there that we're getting to, as we hinted to, driving business value. Because if we don't do that last bit of drive business value, it's all for naught, and none of us have jobs, right? So it's like, okay, fair enough, no matter which side of the spectrum we may be hit to, or even in the middle. Cool. Okay, so this is where I want to hopefully get a little money, and you guys can help me. Right, all of that helps with this idea, and again, Bob, you were hinting to it, right? Bottlenecks or constraints within the system, avoiding those key masters, avoiding those gatekeepers, right? I think we all know what happens when that starts to play out, right? The key master and the gatekeeper lead us to these three, right? Which are pretty bad for us, right? So, like, we don't want to go here, right? So within our teams, within our organizations, we want to try to hedge that against, right? So thanks, Inario. I see at least the one laughy emoji, which is good enough. I'll take that as it worked enough. So, and if anybody doesn't get the reference, okay. Yep. I was just gonna say, if anybody doesn't get the reference, you're not nerdy enough for us, and you got to go watch some movies. It's okay.
or maybe they could just be really young too. I mean, that's a possibility, I guess. So no. What I was going to say, one of the things, or one of the sayings that I've heard around this is breaking down silos, right? Like, you end up people with like very siloed knowledge. They know this person's the person for such, right? You really need to work in a much more cross-functionally way, or not need to, but I think the goal is to work in a much more cross-functional way.
Yeah, I mean, certain things you will always catch, right? Like the dev that's, it works on my machine. Okay, yeah, like cool, but like not full value out the door, right? Or the idea of like an ops guy that's like, well, it works in environment A, it doesn't in B. that's your problem. You didn't build it right. Where it's no, like you probably know it's like help, right? Like figure stuff out. Let's work together. Holistically, the way, yep, Mike, I've started to refer to this is like we are still, of course, even behind the idea of shifting to team focus, which is I think a good thing. With my current client, like huge PDO driven, shift, right? The idea of focused on product, but behind all of that is high quality, high performing teams. But you don't have teams unless you have individuals, and individuals are still humans, right? So I break it down to
Absolutely.
that end, last barrier. It's about shifting the care. And shifting that care, I mean, moving ourselves out of a me mentality and embracing a we mentality. So that concept is a big one I keep pushing for a lot in places. It's like, just simplify it down to that. Less about me, more about we, and where do we go with this, right? And the idea of collaboration, community, all of that right stuff again. So cool.
Daniel, there's another way that I've found that works for me anyway to express that same underlying principle. It's not about me,
please.
it's about we. And that is, we're not here to deliver software. That's what management seems to think. That's what a lot of companies think. We're here to develop solutions to people's problems. And that takes all of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good, Bob.
Yeah, I've got one that I've kind of embraced with the organization I'm supporting my client that I've embraced lately, and it's shifting away from the doers of things to the creators' value, right? And it's like, okay, like if we can embrace that context to it, it could be valuable. So yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Bob. Cool.
I was going to say too, I've seen it happen more than once. I mean, you talk about key masters and gatekeepers, that people will avoid a simple solution because they have a preference for a more complicated approach. It's like, hey, this guy needs to do this one thing, and sorry, not to be sexist, this person needs to do this one thing, and they can do it in Excel and it'll only take them a couple of minutes. No, we can't use Excel. We have to have a very big spreadsheet or a big database because that's the way we build everything. And it's like, what's wrong with Excel? I mean, yeah, you're not going to do it forever, but there's that gatekeeper key master type thing where it's like, oh, you can't use that. We don't use that. We build whole applications with databases and web pages, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't matter if Excel would be simple or easy,
Yeah. I think that's an interesting angle and maybe worth exploring. Some future topic is almost the overlay of architecture and systems thinking and the need for structure against all of that, right? Because it's a challenge, and it's about finding the balance in between, I suppose, all that good stuff. So
Daniel, now you went and said that architecture word, right? If you think about
probably shouldn't have, but I did. Yes.
If you think about where ops has traditionally been, and by and large still is, as a distinct entity from dev, which in a lot of cases is also distinct from testing, yada, yada. There's also architects that are sort of like also a distinct thing, or it's in a lot of organizations, they are treated that way or allowed to behave that way. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a really good talk, and I'm trying to remember who it was giving it. The guy that created C4 and wrote the book on it, I can't remember his name right at the moment, was talking about the application architecture as a service, pronounced ass. Because it's like, if that guy has the mentality that says, yeah, I just designed it, it's someone else's problem to make it work.
Yep. Yep. Pass the buck, right?
They're two opposite ends of the same problem.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I was going to type it, but I'll just ask it. And I think you shared, these calmer principles think I've got a reference from somewhere like way back. It's jogging something, but I don't know that I could bring it up. So I'm curious if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
Sharon. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so when you were talking about the church and whatnot, it was kind of like or the Church of DevOps, I think was the comment in there.
Yeah.
People need to rally around to get DevOps to work. I think, Anario, you were chatting around earlier about, hey, quality's got to do this and quality's got to do that. And I'm scratching my head and going, dude, did you and I not have enough conversations that says testing's got to start with the devs? Yeah, okay. You know exactly what I'm talking about, buddy.
That doesn't sound like me, Ann. I gotta say.
Yeah. So Calmer, you've got these are kind of like DevOps principles, if you will. It's a nice little acronym. You've got cultural attributes. You got to be able to automate. Things need to focus on lean. How lean can we go? How repetitive can we go, in other words, right? You got to be able to measure it. And then you're talking about recovery. Recovery from the sense of not do we have a problem and how do we get back on our feet, but recovery that says, all right, how do we look at what we can improve? Where's our next point of pain to investigate, right? And that's being able to show yourself as, all right, I'm open to improvement. Everybody on board, whether you're looking at DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever form you're in. You got to be able to have everybody rally around these flags and principles. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I love it. Thanks, Ann, for sharing. I think I'll mix that in this deck when I get the chance. I love it. Okay, awesome. Any other thoughts on focus in why we might want to think and care through this stuff? That was great. I think that led us to the right place, because now I'm going to shift a little bit to double back on the origin a little bit and talk to the sorry, I lost focus again. The origin flavors, right? The original flavors. The idea of like DevOps started again with this idea of co-location. Let's just get development and operations teams to work better together, right? Simplify it wherever and however we can, right? On a daily basis, if possible, right? They're either part of the same team or they're sharing a scrum of scrums or whatever could be that means to that end. But co-location was the idea of like, let's just bring them closer together. Then there was the other side of that, kind of the flip side of that coin of like evolution in a sense, like the team evolves to embrace those right things, right? Maybe not specialists in all the things, right? But they're more, generalizing specialists versus specializing generalists, and that they're starting to bring that stuff in a meaningful way that's right for them, right? And then say, okay, cool, here's the right collection of things. Here's our knowledge and how we do these things, and let's all be accountable and responsible to these things, right? So we start to share the responsibilities in a sense, and it just becomes part of that normal working routine. So like those are those kind of first original DevOps flavors. And now, and I think Mr. Oslo, because there's a lot of mics out there, when you were referencing security, we start to think through variations that are starting to come about, right? Like now there's, this is where it's I guess it wouldn't be a double, but it is the 3 words now coming together rather than the 2. It's the idea of DevSecOps, right? So now all of a sudden we have development and security and operations. And we're bringing all 3 worlds together, right? And it's almost like, oh, well, weren't they always? And like, maybe, but like the idea of making it a real thing, an explicit thing, I think is important. That's the idea, is because I think you're spot on. Like, it's far too often we care about building it, we care about getting it out there, We don't really care about protecting it and ourselves from danger, right? Like we don't tend to go there. So it's like, okay, let's bring that in piece intentionally in the middle. So it's bringing, security in there as well, intentionally. And then I've even started to see things pop up out there in the wild, right? Of like GitOps now, which is interesting because it's not necessarily about bringing the different teams together, but this is more about like, if we're starting to evolve the operations world to be more code based, and that's where this configuration as code plays in, can we treat it more like real code? And therefore things like Git make sense, right? Keep your operations, things, your scripts, your build files, your YAML files, like whatever those things are, in a source control, Git flow, Git, workspace. So you can, branch and do the different things. You can run short little experiments and, either accept it or decline it, right? And like thinking through that stuff almost in this idea of, operations as code, if I wanted to, step it up even one level beyond configuration as code. And that's where things like GitOps is starting to play in. And I think it's pretty interesting. I think it makes sense. Part of me is like, okay, is it actually bridging the gap or is it creating a bigger divide? There's a question that maybe we could think through and play out at some point there. But ultimately, I would suggest moving the better direction either which way, any which way. So fair.
Interesting, Daniel. That's actually the first time I've heard the term GetOps or GitOps, whichever. The concept as you described it, however, I have heard stated the different way, and that's infrastructure as code or infra as code. Terraform leverages that terminology.
Yep. I think I could just as easily have put, and I think maybe it's even a better perspective there of where I did configuration as code, we could almost do infrastructure as code there and, build that out respectively. Maybe it's both. So I like it.
It almost seems as if part of DevSecOps is someone on the team should be tasked with, hey, make sure the tooling's up to date. I mean, that whole Equifax thing, it was just because they had an old version of some Java tooling, if I remember right. And all they had to do was deploy a new version. The vulnerability would have went away. And they tried to deploy it, and the management, I think, blocked them from doing it. But, I think sometimes as technologists, we need to say, hey, look, I understand you're concerned, but this needs to happen because this is a known vulnerability and someone could be exploiting it. And of course they did. And that also factors into the infrastructure as code too, because, you want a repeatable deployment and, when you upgrade, like, hey, this one library we rely on is a newer version, takes care of this known vulnerability. If you add that into the infrastructure as code stuff, so that when it deploys the newer version, so much the better.
So they didn't run npm dev fix, which does exactly that.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of this stuff.
I don't remember the whole Equifax story, but
I mean, it's probably not as simple as that, right? So, like we have a lot of automation around, determining whether or not we have vulnerabilities, especially in the production, compiles rather. So like the released product that's going to be out there in the wild. And really, there are specific processes that we follow, like based on our security, protocols and procedures, right? Like X type of thing has to be solved within this amount of time, right? And so one thing I'm going to quickly mention about IAC or infrastructure as code that I found is being able to, I don't want to say observability exactly, but kind of. For instance, I was taking a guy through some of the Amazon UI stuff, right? Like, and the infrastructure for the particular client is pretty large, right? And I needed to find something, or he wanted to find something. He said, "Where is such and such?" And I said, "Oh, well, we're not going to look here for that." I said, let's go into the code base. I said, go ahead and go into the code base right now and filter into the Terraform or, the infrastructure as code stuff. And I said, just grep for what you're looking for. And he found it in like 2 seconds. Clicking through buttons on Amazon's UI, it could, who knows? You might never find it, right? So just the explorability, I'll call it, and finding what you need very, very quickly, as well as the repeatability. I mean, it's just like nothing is a silver bullet, but I feel like it's made the whole process better for both ops and dev, right? Because the ops people, they're still gonna, it's not like they're not going to be typing up bash scripts or doing different things. They still have to run commands at the end of the day. Why not create that in a repeatable way? And so that's where I see a big benefit of that. So
Mike, you used
Yeah,
the term DevSec, or maybe Daniel.
that was somebody
earlier.
else. It was Daniel, I think. Yeah.
They said DevSecOps. And to HashiCorp's credit, they've created what I haven't used it, but from everything that I've read about it, seems like a hell of a great idea. And that's security policy as code. So that literally you can get the answer to the question, ooh, can I open this port there? And if you try it and it doesn't work, you'll get told exactly what you have to do, because the answer is no, because there's a machine basically enforcing that. You can't do that.
Yeah. Very
I was
cool.
going to say, I remember reading, and it's been a couple of years now, but security is so dismal. There's some academic study that they looked at public websites and found like maybe 37% of public facing websites were all up to date, no known vulnerabilities in the JavaScript they were using. But the other, 63%, whatever,
63.
the balance were had outdated JavaScript libraries that had known vulnerabilities. And it was just like, this is amazing to me that, I understand this conservativeness about, like, I just don't want to upgrade, until I got a chance to test, and I get that. But again, that just seems like such a failure on the part of so many technical folks.
Yeah. I mean, it's inherent, right? But as with all things, there's risk and there's reward, and there's a balance between the two of those, right? And understanding where you need to focus, limited time, limited budgets, all going to play in for sure. So I like that, Anario, because that's going to lead us over here and talk to some of the drivers, right? So now we'll bounce over and kind of talk, okay, what maybe is some instigators or pushers for why we would care about this stuff, right? So like, obviously, I think Anario, you kind of hinted to it earlier, as we're building better approaches to how we work and how we build things, right? Through, working in an agile way, perhaps, right? Of a 2-week iteration, it would be nice to be able to move faster, right? So like our inherently our processes are driving, some of that with the way we're working. So maybe that's a reason for embracing DevOps. This increased demand, and it's only continuing to go faster and faster as, things evolve and the world gets, more and more, progressive this way. But, we wanted it yesterday, so let's at least try to get it tomorrow, as opposed to, oh, we can wait a year or two. Right, the world has changed far faster than a lot of the systems do. Hence the 67% or whatever it is. But that wide availability of the tools that just make this inherently super easy. I don't want to say super easy, but easier maybe. Right. So technical advancements and both internal, external context here will guide us the right way. So, right, the idea of shifting from on-prem to cloud, for right reasons, and adopting and embracing some of that, right? So that can be a driver. And then just the idea of, as we hinted to in some of those earlier conversations, right, with increased, access to data, logs, the tools for automation, the configuration, management, and observability. I like that word a lot. Mike, so like being able to, again, take advantage of all of that in a sense, right? Those can be, lots of some of the drivers for why and what we would go to this. And of course, everybody's reasons would be their own, but they're probably usually pretty valid for good reason. I have this focused in. Let me try there. Okay. So we talked a little bit, kind of just a few moments ago too, of like what I would maybe call some of these constraints or barriers to this. Let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. Yep. And there was this idea that I kind of hit to at the moment when you were talking through it, Anaria, where I was like, oh, like we really want the power to the people, right? So again, if we're avoiding the gatekeepers and avoiding, you know, the key masters to do this stuff, we want to inherently get the power down to the people where they can make the difference and make it real. Cool. That's where the real work's happening. But a lot of times, most organizations and perhaps even into the teams, there's an absence or some sort of lack of trust and belief that we could do it, like, and that we're, you know, doing it for right reasons. So, you know, building upon that is, I think, a big thing there, right? And if you're exploring, you know, getting your team or your organization into a more DevOps, you know, focused, right, you know, beneficial, new working or way of working, I guess I'll phrase it that way. You're going to want to take a serious look at that opportunity for either embracing and building better trust, or like using that as a gauge to be like, we would love to go there, but because we're missing this trust, it's not working, or whatever it could be, right? Or is maybe a risk, and just playing that out. A lot of times there's this idea in that the balance between consistency and flexibility, right? Like we want structure and we want, you know, a given path and a single way to do the thing. But by embracing that, we lose inherent flexibility, right? So there's a balance to be struck there between, okay, if we want to do this in a consistent way and all of our teams follow such and such a process or a standard, right? Do we inherently, you know, reduce their flexibility and, right, you know, kind of constrain them in ways that we weren't, you know, weren't intentional, but maybe are for right reasons, right? Like the security angles are certainly one of those. Compliance angles is inherently one of those, right? Like you must do this thing to be compliant. Well, okay, there you go. That's where we'll want to look for then the best way to do the thing. And just playing through all of that, I suppose. The idea, like, our needs may be different, our goals may be different, right? So what might be right for the one side, right for the devs, may be in fact inversely wrong and harmful even to the ops side, right? Like, okay, like there's something to understand with that. Now, again, ideally the opportunity to come together and have a good, frank conversation and have the trust to do so and be able to come to quick resolution through collaboration, play on in that benefit. But it's realizing like different people, different goals, different dreams, that's real. We're gonna have to work through that, right? So, you know, understanding that. And then I kind of throw out, like, there's probably plenty of other constraints and barriers to organizations making this real, perceived or not, you know, that they could, you know, and start to embrace this stuff. So hinting to some practices then. Daily touch points, of course, getting either involved in stand-ups and, you know, collaborating. Again, whether it's a stand-up of stand-ups or you're just part of the team, right? And embracing all of that in the right, you know, way. Collaborative, you know, estimation or planning, if you're working, you know, in a way that allows you to align your plans, and get that, you know, feedback fast. As Bob was saying, I think feedback's an important word here throughout the idea of DevOps is, you know, shorter feedback cycles. You know, obviously things like CI/CD, you know, automation builds, all of that could be lumped into there. But the idea of like we're using tools and techniques to allow that to happen faster, better. Of course, automated testing and, you know, maybe even, you know, the idea of like getting into automated dashboards that represent, you know, some of the key important things for us, and making those big and visible. This was an interesting paradigm that I just played out with some teams I've been supporting lately. It's like, yeah, back in the day, the big and visible used to be great. It was a TV we had in the team room and all of the stuff was just radiated from that. And it's like, how do you do that virtually? And it's like, well, you find a way to stream that to team, right? Like, obviously they're probably not going to have their own monitor to just look at stuff, but maybe there's a page they can go visit on some frequent basis. Maybe there's an aspect that you can feed some of that stuff out through, a interaction with Slack or whatever your IM tool of choice is, right? And like, okay, cool, get the information in front of the people is the important idea behind that last one. If dashboards don't work, it's okay, but there's other ways that probably do. So we work to kind of figure that out. Okay, any thoughts to like practices and or where I was with the slide before, the barriers or constraints?
It seems like I heard about a team one time that had like a traffic light of all things. When this was on the build, if the build succeeded, the traffic light was green. If there were warnings, it would go yellow, and if it failed totally, they were red. And I thought that is a great way to make sure that everyone's very aware of the status of the build.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love a physical, something physical that can be seen and almost can't really be avoided, right? Like it's there, it's a light.
I don't know if they were the first ones to do it, but I supported a team that actually had a light that had it, and I still have somewhere buried in my files the scripts to actually run that. That would basically get buried into Jenkins that would say, okay, fire off this stuff to go over there, hit that machine and turn the light the color it needs to be. So if anybody needs that, I could probably hunt it down for you. But yeah, ideally now it's like, okay, well, maybe need a traffic light little widget that sits up in the corner of people's, monitors and just, fires off or does its thing. Yeah, it's about being creative, of course, they're innovative and finding the right ways to continue to leverage that even in our remote world.
It already exists. There's plugins that'll go into your browser or your IDE that do exactly that. That basically you wire it up and it'll show you red flashing light kind of thing in one corner of whatever it is you spend most of your time looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. So here's where I think I got a little stale on y'all.
Before we leave the topic, Daniel,
yeah,
you got to make sure that whatever it is you put up in that automated dashboard, it's got to be important, because if you put trivialities up there, hey, we had 15 warnings and they're not stopping the build or anything like that, then people get into the habit of ignoring it.
Honorio,
ignoring it.
That is so freaking true. Matter of fact, I was going to bring it up later, but I'll just bring it up now because it really is relevant here. I was like, I've been talking a lot. I don't want to talk all the time, but I'll just bring it up. Making sure that the things that you're piping are meaningful, right? So some sort of aggregation or logic there is really what's key, right? Because like you could have an integration with Slack, and there's a point where people just kind of like stop, right? They just don't look at it. Even with the dashboard, you'd run into the same thing. You need to have meaningful, meaningful triggers and events, right? So that's all I wanted to say on that. And I think what I'd like to talk about maybe a little later, maybe at the end where we do Q&A and open discussion, is if anybody has any ideas, tools. I'm sure there's more out there, but that's an area where even I'd like to really learn something on that. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue there, Mike, because we're about to hit a tools slide that I was hinting to as I think pretty stale. So there's probably some stuff we could add to it. So maybe we can all just build out that list as we collaborate. But I think it was just important. There was a couple of things I wanted to hint to again as we're shifting over there. Of course, avoiding the crying wolf scenario, your scenario, right? If the thing is always warning you that something's wrong, nobody ever kind of fixes it or keeps an eye on it, they will absolutely just start to avoid it. And then absolutely, this is certainly a Field of Dreams dynamic, another old movie for those that don't get the reference, go figure it out. But the Field of Dreams, just because we build it doesn't mean they'll see it, right? They have to care enough to want to understand that, hey, I broke something and hey, I should fix it, right? Or, this is important to me, because I think a lot of times we currently we exist in a world where we're hermits in our basement, like I am, and then all of a sudden, like the rest of the world is somebody else's problem. I was like, no, like it's still my world. Just because I'm isolated in a tiny room in the basement doesn't mean anything, right? So it's like building around all of that and understanding that care dynamic is still real. Cool,
There's
cool.
another model that demonstrates that ceasing to care behavior. Nurses, typically in an ICU, for instance, there's a nurse's station, and then there's various patient rooms, either individual or say 2 patients in a room. And very often, if they're in ICU, they have little things stuck all over their heart trying to figure out whether or not they're still alive and their heart's still beating and that sort of thing, right? Well, if the glue doesn't work very well, the damned alarms are going off all the time, every time they move a little bit. It's called a nurse warrior. There's an actual term for it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely, we could embrace that there in the world of code, I believe, as well, for sure. Maybe there's a need for an app for that kind of thing. Awesome. Cool. Let's jump to tools. These were just some things I had in my old deck where I'm like, oh yeah, that's probably mostly all still true, but I haven't revisited this in a while. So this can be one that we might be able to explore and drive out some more. But I didn't see any of these that I knew of to be now MIA and not appropriate, but maybe even some are, evolved into newer, better things. But just kind of like, drawing out from this, the idea of like what's out there. There's configuration management tools, there's release management tools, there's obviously all the cloud infrastructure and different dynamics of all that infrastructure stuff we talked to. There's monitoring and analysis type, tools. Some of these now have them all inherently part of the same thing, right? Like I do believe Google, just gives you from their Google Cloud Platform stuff, the whole kit and caboodle, right? And it all ties together. Tecton is part of it, and it just all is a thing, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Right, take advantage of somebody else's efforts for sure, and use and put together the right things to draw it out. And obviously the last there is the idea of like there's certainly process build code coverage things that we're all usually pretty familiar with that can be integrated as part of a DevOps workflow if we wanted to think of it that way. So thoughts to this slide? Any hot tools that folks are like, hey, I got one that I love. I use it for this. Out there.
Get all the Microsoft folks hacked off if you don't list Azure up there, man.
I was thinking about it. I'm like, and in fact, I think I had it at one point in time and I adjusted the slide and lost it, but you're right. That certainly belongs there in the cloud dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, question for you. You have monitoring tools and analysis. And the analysis tools that I'm used to that actually pay for themselves are things like static analyzers that'll look at your dependencies and say, you're using a library that's got some exposure. To get back to Honorio's point about companies that are running systems. So there's all sorts of status analyzers. I can't remember the name of it. There's about 3 of them or so that'll say, you're using a library that you shouldn't be.
The one that I could think of right offhand that I utilize or we utilize at work and in multiple places is the Code Climate has a lot of templates for that type of stuff. As far as like checking dependencies, verifying their security security checks. I'm trying to remember if Code Climate we're using GitLab at both places that I'm really working for mostly. So I'm not sure if this is just like a GitLab thing, but that's definitely something that that I think is valuable.
Oh, I wish I could remember the name of it, but there was a team that I worked with that had a really, really, really visceral hatred of a particular tool that had been imposed on them by the company that basically just did not work under certain conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a static analyzer that drew the conclusion that they were failing to check or protect stuff coming in from the outside. to make sure that it wasn't going to like blow up the database or, you know, that Johnny Tables kind of thing. And it was just, it had holes in it and they could code around it. And they finally started coding around it to fool it into thinking everything was fine because that was easier.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, as with any right system, things can be gamed, and I think that's, you know, part of it, of course, is, you know, putting in right checks and balances to all things, I suppose. So, okay, yeah, if folks want to just shoot me some thoughts of additional, maybe, you know, again, throw them in the chat if it makes sense. Whatever is good. I knew this slide could use some updates, so I'd appreciate any thoughts. Any other quick ones folks wanted to mention? Fair enough.
Well, I think Terraform is probably a good one to throw in here. This would be, it's kind of like cloud, but it's not a cloud provider, but it's probably a configuration management tool. You know, infrastructure as code. I would 100% without even having to go off to the side. I think that's a good one to add.
Agreed. And it'll work against any of the cloud.
All of the
platforms.
exactly. That's kind of what I love about it. Matter of fact, there's a really good video that I watched on it a while back that kind of helped solidify some of the principles. I'm going to see if I could find that video, and I will post that in the chat.
Cool.
It's like 2 hours, but it was maybe 4 hours. It was really valuable though. It was worth the whole watch.
Awesome. Yeah, please share. Yeah, we'll have to.
Sorry, go ahead. Here's another one. Yep, no problem. Sorry, I pulled up another screen, so I can't see your screen. I'm going to go back to it really quick. I don't know where this exactly would fall in. It would be process build code coverage. There are some tools that I've started to use, like Lerna. That will allow you to essentially create. So let's say you have a library, you know, a bunch of packages that essentially need to function as one large library, and you want to make sure that there aren't dependency clashes and whatnot. Lerna is something that I've learned about in the last couple months here. It just has a lot of different automations for allowing you to, let's say, run CI against just one of the libraries or the whole set of libraries, right? And then updating dependencies or fixing, you know, security issues with like the audit fix and whatnot, doing that either at like a micro level for one library within your set of libraries or the whole thing, right? And it cascades down, and it kind of allows there to be a consistency in the dependencies that you're using, right? So if you have, let's say, you know, types and whatnot, or different pieces of, code that or libraries that are going to share common libraries, you know, that can become a mess really quick. And so with Lerna, we've been able to create kind of like a common overall library with sub libraries, like, you know, one for logging, one for such and such client, one for our such and such types. That's been really kind of invaluable, and I'm still just scratching the surface. So
okay, awesome. Did I spell it right? I'm gonna go look that one
I
up.
think there's no A in the middle. Yep. So
Okay.
just get rid of, yeah, I believe it. Yep. So that should be it. And I'll see if I can find that Terraform video too.
Very cool. Yeah,
Hey,
if we
Daniel,
don't get to sharing it here and stuff in this thread here, right? We can certainly jump out to, you know, our respective groups.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Share in a broader sense. So it's cool. Feel free to sync back to that. And sorry, go ahead and
I was going to say, I don't know if you want to add it as a broad category of tools, but what about automated testing?
Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably a whole collection in and of itself. So yeah, I had a point where I was like, well, it really should probably be a list of process, list of build, a list of code coverage, right? And like each of those can be their own. I
just
think
mention a suggestion.
Yeah. No, I like it. That's true too.
There are so many categories of testing. Generative test, stress test, security test, every variety under the sun.
All the tests. Yes, exactly. Cool. All right, let me, where we go next? Future focus now, like what are some possibilities, right? Where does DevOps allow us to go? And I think even if we were to step it back and just say, oh, well, like DevOps is based back to that, or focus back to that base of, it's about getting folks to talk together, break down some of those barriers, right? What if we, took our idea of the products and services that we put together, our projects in a sense, and shifted that focus a little bit, right? What if some of those ops perspectives were brought earlier in the cycle and we thought through that stuff before we did it, right? I think far too often we treat ops as the last step or the last hurdle, right? What if it was the first hurdle, right? What if we thought about that stuff before we did it? What could we learn before we even did the things, right? Or built the things? Okay, cool. And then we can, go from that flow and go from that approach, knowing what we know. And it's like, that could be helpful perhaps. What if the business had a better buy-in? Like, I know this plays into some of those other angles a lot, like the design world, right? We're still facing that and trying to bring, design aspects earlier into the flow. Well, what if, operations stuff came as a valuable asset earlier in the flow and they bought into that, right? Same with testing or any of those other angles of things we hold off on too late, too long, too late, and then don't really get the time to make it better because we got delivery pressure. So always will, always have. Right? Okay, cool. Like force it early. We'll have to have those conversations, then make those decisions, then move forward, right? And just thinking through. So, that's where DevOps can be a structure to support some of that, whether it's a true collection of tools that does it, or maybe, again, just a mindset we embrace. That's my cursor. This idea of no ops, I think, is an interesting one. I kind of, put this together at one point in time a while back, but there's a couple theories that kind of resonate behind it. And it's right, just this idea of like, well, what if we did just rely on the service aspects, right? Of like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And all of a sudden, right, the need for the quote unquote, individual human to do it. Like, I don't want to lead us to the whole robot revolution, but like the idea of like, if we can rely on systems to do this for us, right? Is that an advantage for us, right? And then those folks can do the more beneficial things that they probably want to do rather than just clicking buttons through a tool, right? It's like, okay, cool. Like if we can get this more service oriented in a sense, and I think again, this is where a lot of those cloud-based systems are, hitting us and hedging us that way, right? Is the idea of, okay, if we've got and a system like Azure, right? That just, a platform like Azure that just allows us to get it all inherently as part of the deal. Like that's great. I think I still have the tab open for it, but I just learned about a group that's it's basically a startup that's basically trying to make DevOps a service, right? You rely on them and they do all the things. It's like, oh, that's interesting, right? So it's again the kind of like possibilities. Where do we get to go with this? And then this idea of like, if we can embrace all of that right stuff, maybe it's not system driven, but maybe it's again inherently embraced by the rest of the team, right? If we can get our development, folks embracing this stuff well enough. We've still got the specialists where they need it, but like they can inherently do it. It's that idea of like the knowledge is within the team then. Maybe that's an idea to bring through. So it's kind of embracing this single team mindset of like we can do it all. Right? And we're trusted enough, we're nimble enough, we're wise enough, we're all the things enough that we can just manage all the things in our own world. And this probably plays out more so in an enterprise environment because inherently startups tend to do this anyway, right? Like a startup that has a founder and one builder, well, guess what? He's all the things, right? Like it's not necessarily bad, just doesn't scale well. How do we hold on to that idea and that concept, but not lose, the benefits in a sense, right? And or get threatened and put a bunch of risk in the system. So just stuff to think about there. Okay, I think that kind of gets me through all the slides. And I just realized I meant to bring the copy down. In fact, I'm going to do it now. Shh, you guys don't see me doing this. This is This is me secretly borrowing my own slide from above. Boop. Bringing it down here. Didn't want to put it where I thought it should go. So I'm going to drag it down there. Here we go. All right. So let's revisit our seated question. Is DevOps a role we would fill on a team? It's inherently a trick question, right? So don't get too caught up with it. There's no wrong answer here. It's the idea of like, I think maybe, right? And there are organizations that are hiring DevOps engineers, right? I'm like, okay, cool. If you really need that, maybe there's a thing there, right? But then there's the idea, like for me, I think we as an industry have overemphasized the need for Scrum Masters. Because we can't get the team to talk enough, we need somebody in place to do the talking for them and the orchestration for them and like all this overhead. And yeah, I'm going to take that whip analogy and believe it's true, right? It's like, okay, yes. So how do we embrace the thing without needing the human to do it in a sense, right? So like maybe you need the role as the DevOps engineer, but maybe you just need to embrace a DevOps mindset, right? As a team or as an organization. Maybe you can find the right balance between getting these two worlds to come together in the right meaningful way. And maybe you can't. And like, there's probably some balance with that even in of itself, right? There are probably some ops things that just need to be ops things. Cool. There's certainly some dev things that maybe are just best as dev things. Maybe you can bring them together, maybe you shouldn't. And like there are all those things to play in and around this idea of, you know, DevOps as our, you know, concatenated word there. So thoughts? This is where I officially say, yes, let's Q&A and have a discussion if anybody's interested.
You know, when you were mentioning about DevOps as a service earlier, I thought at one point in my career, I was a one-man IT department. I mean, I did everything, right? And I thought about, there was a saying, I think it was J. Paul Getty or somebody said one time, if you owe the bank $1,000, you're in trouble. If you owe the bank $1 million, the bank is in trouble. And I think the same thing is true of like DevOps as a service. If you know what you're doing and DevOps helps you out, you're fine. But if they know what they're doing and you don't, then you're in trouble. You know, so you always gotta keep some of that knowledge in house. I mean, you can't just shift it off to anybody really as a service. You know.
So
yeah, there's an inherent trade-off to risk reward dynamic. Absolutely, that plays out there. Go ahead, Bob.
I'll put this 2 cents in because it's, as those of you who know me know that I'm kind of absolutely crazy about mob programming, like it's the solution to absolutely everything, or it's at least better than practically everything. And in that context, you don't have to have all of the knowledge to do absolutely everything on the team all the time, but you can build a process where you're borrowing people into, bringing them into your team on an as needed basis so that over time, sufficient knowledge gets developed within the team that they can handle it in a pinch. And that way, the focus is not on the doing, it's on the learning how to do with repetition, with exposure. And you can build almost anything with that.
Yeah, that's very true. I like that. Cool. Other thoughts?
I have a quick question, probably really for the group. So I've looked at a couple of books on DevOps as an overall. I haven't been pleased with anything that I found, but I don't know the names of the books right offhand. Any suggestions on books books or content, right? Because there are courses as well that are just absolutely fantastic at explaining the benefits of DevOps and how to get started with it and how to carry through, because that's the most important thing, right? Anybody can get started.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I would also appreciate the community thoughts here, and/or again, maybe that's something we can explore and circle back to in the near future in a sense.
We
I
can
did
take
some
that to the
Googling.
forum too, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I did some Googling. I wanted to add in kind of a resources page here, but all I was doing was borrowing stuff from Google. And I'm like, I haven't vetted any of that yet. So I don't know that I trust it, and I don't want to lead people astray. So my idea of like, oh, if you're interested, I gave you enough seeds to Google yourself, right? So it's like, okay, you know, run with it. But the idea of anything good, yeah, folks have something good to share, please.
Follow up to what Mike said, I get the impression, and perhaps you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's really kind of two flavors of DevOps. There's a flavor of DevOps where I'm doing everything on my own servers locally. And then there's a flavor of DevOps where I'm deploying out to the cloud. I'm deploying out to like a Kubernetes cluster on, or Kubernetes, whatever the right term is, out on AWS or Google or something like that. Am I understanding right, or am I off the mark?
Are they distinct from one another, or is it just that's where the production stuff runs? It's a cloud in one case and it's a local machine that's downstairs in another case.
Yeah, I was going to inherently say, Nario, I think it's a little bit more, it's almost like 4-tiered, or like a decision tree is starting to build its way through this, right? Like, because you could say on or off, and we or they, right? And like now it's like, okay, there's different variations, and simplifying that even more so, but it's like there's probably, yes, some context to all that. What I would suggest is there is thought and intention to how you choose to approach DevOps, right? So knowing your constraints, knowing what works for you and your organization, working through and understanding those dynamics is all, you know, part of that, you know, that equation to get us to the right solution, if that makes sense, right? And yeah, I think, you know, that simple 2-step is easy enough, but it's probably more like a 4-step, 6-step, 8-step dance. You know, this is where I think getting help can help, right? Like you know, find someone like myself that has been around the block a few times, to seen it done in various different ways, and approach it from like, okay, how and what works for us, and get some thoughts and some feedback. And then, you know, as with all things, right, incremental steps in the right direction and experimenting with fast feedback loops, right? Super important to all of that.
Right. I'm not talking about like from the perspective of practices. I'm talking about from the perspective of tooling. If I were deploying, if I were doing DevOps on my local machines, am I going to use different tooling that I would use if I were deploying out to AWS or Google Cloud? And I'm asking, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
ideally no, but probably yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Because say, Honorio, when you use the term DevOps, if what you're using it for in that particular case where I'm using it, quote, on my local machine, does that mean a machine that's in your company's computer room, or do you mean this is my workstation? Very different things. They're both my machine, so to speak. If it's the thing that's in the computer room down on the next floor or up on the next floor or whatever, then the only difference between that and the cloud is that chances are the community that that application serves are like all in this time zone or something, as opposed to I need to do it in the cloud in order to have it so that I can have it on 2 different data centers on opposite coast to handle things like latencies, things like that. They're qualitatively very different problems.
Okay, good point. Yeah, I confess I was thinking about on the cloud versus on premises, but I see what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's all part of that equation again. So, you know, great thought, great question in essence, but you know, no right or wrong answer if that, you know, is you know, contextual enough. Very cool. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, feedback of all the good stuffs?
besides the DevOps angle of using a cloud, I've fairly recently been sort of dragged into, in the context of doing a little exercise thing, development designed specifically for development with groups in the cloud. And I mean things like, what is it called? Get something. God, I just used it like yesterday and I can't think of what it is. But basically it gives you a browser-based interface and you can actually run scripts within it that will make it really, really nice IDE in terms of it's the thing that's just like, what's Microsoft's IDE?
Visual Studio Code.
Like Visual Studio Code.
Visual Studio.
Yeah.
So this thing runs in the cloud, but it's basically just Visual Studio. It doesn't have all of the refactoring and stuff, but it'll give you like split windows and you can have a terminal running.
There are a few of these.
Automatically
Yeah.
detect.
So Cloud9 is
something.
one that I know of. I think that's pretty popular. There's another one that I'm trying to think of, and you could do a lot more with it. Like it's really focused on truly developing all, in a web-based IDE in the cloud, managing
Yep.
your assets, tooling stuff together. You don't need to have a local browser, which also is nice because you don't need to have a local environment, right? Like I said, if everything is built up through configurations, you don't have everybody with these different local machines, right, that all need, a Vagrant wrapper and then a bunch, Docker stuff inside, right? I think that's pretty much, in my experience, the common way it's been done for years now. And it does work. I mean, it really does work, but it's kind of nice when it's like it's truly cloud native, right, even at the development step.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was trying to get at, was the fact that we're always thinking in terms of you deploy to the cloud. But these days,
what if you're already there?
You can actually develop it.
What if you're already there? Yeah, I agree.
What's sweet about it is it has all the bells and whistles that you look for in an IDE, like the color keyword highlighting and the refactoring and shortcuts and all that good stuff, but also a terminal that's right there that's just half your screen, so you can actually watch the build every time you change. It automatically says, oh, that changed, that didn't work. You created the syntax error. It's right there, and that's running in the cloud. You're not even running IntelliJ or whatever.
Is it possibly Code Sandbox? I'm trying to figure out what the specific one that you were talking about is. Maybe we.
Let me see if I can find it in my history.
There's something called Live Share, but that's like a plugin for Visual Studio Code.
That's a plugin for VS Code.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is basically, it's described consistently as it's like VS Code running in the cloud. It's got almost all the bells and whistles of VS Code.
I know what you're talking about, Bob. I just can't, it's not coming to mind.
It's Get something. I can't remember what.
As in GIT or GET?
GIT, I think.
I just found reference to something called Cloud Code for VS Code.
Definitely something. Yeah, Bob, I mean, if you don't find it now, feel free to it's not Gitpod, is it? No, never.
Gitpod.
It is Gitpod. Okay. Yeah, I just found that.
it because as recently as 2 days ago, I was using it, doing an exercise with some friends, and we were using Gitpod because he said, we usually use like Cyber Dojo when we're just fooling around because it's so frictionless. But for this language that we're interested in experimenting with, it doesn't have a linter and it doesn't do the color keyword highlighting. But I happen to know that Gitpod does. And someone actually showed me some tricks within Gitpod that you can actually run a terminal in Gitpod. And then within that, you can do a curl script to pull down something and then run it. And it'll automatically say, oh, I see that you changed something. And it'll run the test. So you literally, you make a change, you see it instantly. You haven't done anything but make the change. It's kind of sweet. It's a really nice kind of
I'll
an
have to look at this,
environment.
Bob. This is cool. That's really cool, man.
Yeah.
Good
We were
stuff.
having fun with it.
I could see where a lot of places, I mean, I was talking to somebody recently about remote work, and one of the problems being, being able to interact in real time on code. And I could see where a lot of places could use this kind of thing for that.
Oh, and that's the thing is that with Gitpod too, you can share your, I don't know if it's called a view or a repo or whatever it is.
I think workspaces is what it's called. At least I just signed in. Yeah, I connected to it because this is interesting.
Yeah, so you can have a shared workspace so that there is no transfer. If you just are connected, you can make changes too.
Very
Very cool.
interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to explore it. Maybe we got a upcoming session identified there, Mike and Onario. Could be a fun one to get into. Well, cool. I'm gonna circle
you did
us
say
back.
you do a talk, so
Yeah. There we go.
all right, plus back, yes, please.
Yep. Nope. Just kind of wrapping up here, right? So if there's a challenge to embrace from this, right? It's like start to think about DevOps if you're not already. Mike, sounds like certainly you're already heading that way, but anybody that's in the group here left that's in an organization that you're not necessarily embracing DevOps, thinking through it, maybe there's an opportunity for you, right? So what can you do to open the doors there, increase collaboration between the different, if you still got a true dev team and a true ops team, and like there is a wall, things get passed over, like maybe you can start to break that down. Working more collaboratively and thinking through that right stuff. So shifting that way, of course, maybe then embracing tools, all the right stuff that gets us in that direction. So, thinking about it, pushing for it can be the first step to, working in better ways. So other than that, that was kind of, the great conversation and discussion I was hoping for today, right? You guys helped me take what I thought was 20 slides that would be a 15-minute quick walkthrough, and we turned it into an hour and 45 minutes of collaborative conversation. So that is amazing, and appreciate everyone for joining in. I'll wrap it up with a thank you, of course, and here's the details if you want to reach out to me. But you guys know where to find me, and plenty of our local scene, and broader if you need to. Here's where we're at. Again, if I can help in any way for you, your organization, embracing the right things, this DevOps focused or any other right avenue, please reach out. So thanks for having me, gang.